Good morning everybody, thank you for coming today. If you'd like to take your seats and we'll just run through a few bits and pieces. So thank you for everybody coming out today to hear the Fresh Start Foundation. My name is Stuart. I just want to run through a few housekeeping things. If we hear the fire alarm, it will be the real deal, so if you just want to head out the front door and congregate out the car park. We will be breaking for tea and coffee shortly, and if you just make your way through to the kitchen, if you speak to George at the front desk, he'll show you where the kitchen is and you'll be able to get some tea and coffee through there. We do talk today about issues that can be quite close to people's hearts and minds, and if at any point you feel that things are getting a bit tough and you don't want to hear things, don't worry, leave the room, or we do have a counsellor on site if you feel you'd like to speak to somebody in a private capacity out with the area. There are cameras being filmed. Don't worry, at the back of the room you are on camera. If you have something to say at any point, we are quite a fluid meeting today, so don't feel you have to sit in silence, raise your hand, I'll try and come to you at the time. If you do want to say something on camera, feel free and come up to the front and speak to the audience, otherwise sit where you are, keep quiet and ask questions away as you go. Without further ado, we'll head off to start. Today David will be speaking second, but before we begin, Kat, one of our other directors, has made a little video with some music which will act as an introduction. I'll say some words later on and we'll get to our main speaker, John Wedger, after lunch. So, thanks for coming and let's begin. really stopped shocking me the amount of information that's out there in the public domain with what we talk about, but hardly anybody knows about it. And for the record, everything we do talk about is in the public domain, and as David will go into more of what Fresh Start Foundation does, we only bring things from the public domain that's out there. I personally am not an expert on what we do, I'm learning every day, but yeah, we get there. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce David Scott from Northern Exposure and one of the directors here at Fresh Start Foundation, who will tell you a little bit about what we do.
Well, thank you everyone for coming along today through the snow. There's some people here who weren't here last week. We had the first event last week, which was the first roadshow, and that was in Edinburgh. So I'll just give a very brief outline of why we're here, and then I want to explain some of the things I learned from last week and some of my reflections on it, and explain where I see this going, and then perhaps open it up to the floor for people to comment on what I've got to say. So the event in Edinburgh was our first roadshow. When we were looking at what we wanted to do, our organisation was set up as a People's Inquiry into Child Abuse in Scotland, Child Sexual Abuse, an SRA in Scotland. It was set up in response to everything you saw there, all of these headlines week after week, all this information coming out, and no satisfactory response, no satisfactory resolution. A government inquiry was formed, and then the government inquiry was undermined by the government itself. Susan O'Brien QC resigned, and her public resignation letter was utterly damning. It spoke of dirty tricks, it spoke of micromanagement of an allegedly independent inquiry by government forces, by legal pressure brought by some of the parties that were being examined by that inquiry. It was appalling. So some citizens of this country decided to get together and not just accept it, but start to work to do something about it. So there was a debate then amongst us all as to what we should do and how we would go about this seemingly impossible task. Now, one of the things we wanted to make sure we did is we only said we would do something when it would actually happen, when we could be confident we could deliver. Because people who've been harmed through this abuse, who have been through perhaps many police inquiries and have not received any justice or any closure or any satisfactory remedy, have been failed too often, and we couldn't face failing them again. So we had to find a way forward that was achievable and was practical, and had the potential to take on such a huge problem. So the roadshows are the first part of that. We're going over 2 years to every local authority in Scotland. We're going to the big cities twice. So that's 36 roadshows, so we're going to have 36 keynote addresses by speakers we bring in. That in part will define a large part of the problem. But the roadshows are about much more than providing information going out. We're looking to meet people, we're looking to share ideas, we're looking to build trust, we're looking to get to know people, we're looking for people to join us, because it's a people's inquiry and it will only be successful if it's the people coming together. If it's a small group trying to replicate what the government are doing in a more honest way, it'll fail, because there will never be the resources, there will never be the confidence, there will never be the momentum, and we won't go anywhere. But if we can draw together as a people, then we will. Now, when we presented these ideas, I'll say a little more. After the road shows, we're looking to take testimony from people. which will be done on video, which will be transferred into a written record, which will be a searchable database, and we're looking to then report back to the Scottish people on the nature of everything that we've discovered. And beyond that, where people wish, where individuals who have been harmed wish, and where there's corroboratory evidence, where two unconnected people are both identifying an abuser, then our intention is to go via a grand jury common law system to look at whether indictments should be brought, because too many cases are going to the Crown Office and they're dying in a process which is completely opaque, in a process which is decided behind closed doors and is not decided by a jury of our peers, whereas a common law process, a grand jury process, allows evidence to be put in front of a jury who decide whether there's a case to answer. And if they decide there's a case to answer, there should be a proper trial at that point. So we're trying to overcome the blockage that is represented by the Crown Office, who carry out all criminal prosecution in Scotland, and who have been called institutionally corrupt. So that's a very brief outline of what we're about, but what I want to talk about mostly today is what happened last week in Edinburgh, because I thought it was very interesting and I thought it was very encouraging, because what we saw is the start of something bigger. We were getting people in the audience engaging with us, people who had a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and we walked out of that meeting stronger. And I realised if we can do that 36 times, by the time we finish this process, we will be something completely different. And I was reflecting on that in the couple of days after the meeting. At these meetings, often actually, the people who run them find that the day after, you are completely useless. You just lie around as this psychological withdrawal you've just made from your bank account hits, right? So I was lying around feeling exhausted and trying to reflect on what had happened. And I was watching a video by a chap called Jordan Peterson, who's received a lot of attention because he's standing up for free speech and the exchange of ideas. And he's standing against the government, in this case of Canada, who are wishing to compel his speech and close down any sort of free debate. And he's a professor of psychology and has run a clinical practice in psychology for a long time. So he's written some books, he's got famous, it's taken off in a viral manner on the internet. And people point out he sounds a little bit like Kermit the Frog. So there's now Kermit videos on the internet with Jordan Peterson's voice explaining things about how to stand up straight, put your shoulders back and clean your room and be organised and grasp the bit of chaos that you're living in and make some order out of it. And people are listening to this. So he was in Australia launching his book, and he was interviewed by ABC in Australia and a few other Australian media outfits. And he was talking about the issue of, on a personal level, of facing your dark side, if you like, of facing the fact that you are capable of harm, of evil, and of hurting others, and addressing that, and not so much excluding it, but rather transmuting it into something positive. Right? And he was explaining that the individuals who have gone through this process, he says, you can tell the face changes. They have a determination, a steeliness perhaps about them that they didn't have before. They've lost the naivety. He said, but it's like a martial arts type of strength. They have strength, they have the ability to fight, but the discipline and reserve not to. And then he said a very interesting thing. He paused and he said, what's the word? What do they have? They have an intrinsic... Hang on, let me get this right. Yes. An intrinsic potential for havoc. And he then said, and this is necessary because it's one of the ways you get self-respect. So I was listening to this and I thought, that's what it is. If we as a group take our individual pieces of knowledge of harm that's been done, of systems that have been abused, of crimes that have been committed, of how the system operates, of each little bit of knowledge, standing on its own, doesn't make it, isn't enough. But if we can assemble that knowledge and we can provide it in a way that is accessible and usable and understandable to a wider community, then that wider community, armed with this knowledge, factual, detailed, verifiable information, will have the intrinsic potential for havoc and the discipline, because we're standing on the common law, and the discipline not to create havoc willy-nilly, but only have that potential if it's needed. And here I'm talking about how do you go about taking on this system? Right? How do we as a group of individuals go about taking on a system where the system doesn't want to know? Well, that's where you need that intrinsic potential for havoc. You need that strength, you need that ability in order to avoid simply being sidetracked, sidelined, managed. So I was discussing this with my son last night, and he said, that's interesting. Peterson said something else about this. He was discussing a Bible text. So I got this on YouTube this morning, actually. And he was discussing the Bible text, and the meek shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for the meek shall inherit the earth. And he said, this never made any sense to me because it seemed wrong, meek. He said, I never really viewed meek as much of a virtue. He said, so I was preparing, he'd been doing lectures on the Bible stories, Genesis. So he said, I was looking into this, and again, I'd read this decades ago and it puzzled me, and I never really understood what it meant. So he was looking into what it actually meant. So the word meek, it's not a good translation, or rather it's not a good translation now, because the meanings of words change. He said, what it meant originally was someone who had a sword and knew how to use it, but chose to keep it sheathed. And it also refers to the idea of the Greek word is also used for war horse. So it's not this passive victim type approach that the word meek maybe imparts today. You're talking about something that is much more, well, has this potential, intrinsic potential for havoc, has this strength, but has a discipline not to use it. So, as I was looking at this morning, the quote that Peterson was talking about is from Matthew. It's Christ speaking, but Christ is quoting a psalm, right? So I'll have a look at the psalm, and this psalm's obviously written in Hebrew, and Hebrew is a strange language because words derive from other words, so you can track it back to the core root word and get a little more indication as to what the underlying meaning is. And the core root word behind meek actually means testify, speak out, shout. So what I took from last week, and this is not, as you can tell, a refined, finished thought. This is a work in progress. But what I took from last week is that if we come together, we share information in a controlled, a precise and exact way, we inform one another via this process, and we allow people to testify and when they want to speak out and to shout about what has happened to them. We will become an organisation, a group of people that has collectively, not individually, but collectively, the strength and the potential for havoc that means that we will be a force to be reckoned with, and that we will compel change. It only happens if we all draw together, but it's the ability to compel change that I think that we are all about. So thank you very much for listening to that. Does anyone have anything they would like to add? Judy?
Just a couple of reflections and things that have happened recently. You guys know I've spoken quite a few times, but we were watching Maggie Oliver on TV this morning about the recent scandals that have come out to add to the ones that we already know about. And what I was reflecting on was what made Maggie as a person be able to speak out. And listening to what David said, it made it relevant to me again as well. Years ago, I went through the civil servants fast stream tests, which meant basically I had to do an aptitude test and then I had to go and spend 2 days down south actually doing sort of workshops and seeing a psychologist, would you believe, in 2 days running. And I didn't pass, and the reason I didn't pass was not through any of the aptitude stuff, it was through the psychological stuff, because I was too much of a rebel. I was too much out there. So I didn't come across as somebody that there was one. And I've reflected on those of us that are involved in this and who are speaking out, have that about us. We have a bit of a rebellion. But we should have, because basically the reason that abuse has been silent for so many years and covered up, and there's been the ability to cover it up, is because there weren't enough rebels that were able to stand up. There's too many people whose career rested on it, their house rested on it, their mortgage, their ego and their reputation was going to be affected. Now, there's a lot of things I can't say anymore because if I speak out I'll be jailed, but basically, as you all know, so I have to be sort of careful what I say, but in general, we're still facing a thing as an organisation where the government want hold of our files. It happens all the time. I thought it was gone, and just a few weeks ago I had another communication with a government person who said that they wanted the files or else, basically. So I'm still going through that. Why do they want our files? We still have to reflect on that. So I think there's issues that we're going to uncover as part of this People's Inquiry that need to come out, and that people know are in existence. That's why they want our files. Sometimes I think they think we know more than we actually know, but I mean, but basically we do know a fair bit. So I think this is an absolutely necessary process, and I hope we build and build and build to have hundreds sort of supporting us. But one of the things that I've reflected on is there's been massive attacks on me and my family. There's been attacks on everybody that's involved in Fresh Start Foundation. People have tried to say that we're paedophiles and that we're trying to do this to get information on other paedophiles. I'm sorry, but absolute nonsense, folks. We're out here to shine a light on to what's evil in this world. We absolutely need to stand together and we need to not be afraid. You'll all know it seriously affected my health from December, really, with a lot of the onslaughts that I was getting. It's not going to continue. We're going to get back out there for the next 2 years, and we're going to continue to fight back. I will not hand over any client files at any time. It's not going to happen. Even if we had to go out of business, we wouldn't be handing over client files. The files belong to the clients. But I'm hoping that everybody that's involved within even Wellbeing Scotland comes forward with their testimonies to say what's actually happened here, because what's happening down south is happening all over Scotland. And you all know what happened to us in Falkirk because we tried to shine a light on what was happening in Falkirk. We were squashed out to the side. We were shut down as an organisation within Falkirk so that we couldn't operate anymore because of the range and scale of child abuse that we knew about, and particularly paedophile rings, and also, despite everybody saying it's a fantasy, ritual abuse rings, very, very serious ritual abuse rings within Falkirk. So what happens when you speak out, even when you're a professional organisation, and I'm a professional person, is you're stopped, you're squashed, you're discredited. That's what happens. And that's what we all need to be aware that will happen, and do not let us be divided. Because right now the Scottish Government is giving wee pockets of money to people through certain, I won't say what organisation, but through certain organisations that the Scottish Government are running, they're offering wee people pockets of money to try and divide and conquer everybody. Let's not let it happen.
Anyone else like to say anything else at all? Robert, do you want to come up on that one?
Thank you, Stuart.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me along today, and I'm only going to speak very briefly because, as David was talking and Janine has alluded to as well, there is terrible corruption right at the very top of the Scottish justice and political system. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of this. I won't speak for long, but it just goes to show you how bad things are. David knows all this, he's helped me an awful lot. Now, I just refer to the position of the Lord Advocate of Scotland, who is responsible for all criminal charges and all the rest of it. So what you're up against are people who, most of the people in this room do know about this, also many brave and committed people, but just for the sake of people who perhaps we may see this when the video comes out, I'd like to make it quite clear about just how bad things are and what we're up against and what we have to beat for the sake of all the children of Scotland, the children, the great-grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, and all those that are to come in the future. We've got to fight for all of those people now, or that their whole lives could be destroyed. It could happen to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, it could happen to anybody, anybody's children. Let's have a look at the position of the Lord Advocate, and let's just talk about Elise Angelini, who I think many of you are very familiar with. Now, when she was actually the Lord Advocate, when I was dealing with the Holly Gregg case, we got a letter from Stephen McGowan, who was Procurator Fiscal at the time. This actually came from really on behalf of the Crown Office. It's a Crown Office letter. We knew that Elise Angelini was implicated in the Holly Gregg case already because we had letters from Brian Adam MSP and from Angelini herself in 2001 to Holly's mother's solicitor. So we knew she was implicated in it already, although she denied she had nothing to do with it. But I'm just going to read out just a few things that were in the letter. This is from the Crown Office at the time when Elise Angelini was actually in situ in 2009. And it talks about all the way in which they're not going to investigate Holly Gregg's case because there's not enough information. Of course, that was because we now know that the police did not interview a single one of the 22 people named by Holly, a thoroughly reliable witness. But at one of the paragraphs here is, during the course of this investigation, it has been alleged by others that the Lord Advocate, Elise Angelini QC, had in some way covered up Holly's allegations. These allegations are unfounded, and this has been supported by a careful scrutiny of the case. Yes, all key decisions in relation to the prosecution of Holly's case in 2000 and 2001 were taken before or after the Lord Advocate's time as Regional Procurator Fiscal in Grampian, and were taken by other senior prosecutors, not the Lord Advocate. Listen to this. In addition, the Lord Advocate has not had any involvement in the recent decision by Crown Counsel that there should be no criminal proceedings. Right? There's that. Remember that last sentence? And I've also got another thing here when Elise Angelini took action against the Firm magazine. The only publication that was brave enough to really come out and speak to support Holly. And they were attacked by Elise Angelini, represented by Levy and McRae solicitors, who some of you may have some awareness of. And we've been asked by the Lord Advocate, this is to the Press Complaints Commission, we've been asked by the Lord Advocate, that was Elise Angelini, to make clear the following, and apart from everything else, that she was unaware of the claim at the time and has never had any involvement in the case. This is specifically the Holly Gregg case. But while I was being held unlawfully in Perth Prison in 2004, David went along to a public meeting which Kenny McCaskill, the then Justice Minister, was speaking, and challenged Mr McCaskill over this. And to our astonishment, Mr McCaskill said, over the Holly Gregg case, that the case had been blocked by Eilish Angelini. So there's the government minister telling us that the former head of the Crown Office had actually been involved in the case. And what's more, he went on to write to my MP at the time, David Mowat, who was Conservative and Health Minister. He lost his seat in the last election. And we have a letter now that was sent to my MP and to me, and the sentence here from the Scottish Government, from the crime Directorate is, I understand that Mr Scott in the audience asked the Cabinet Secretary a question about the Holly Gregg case. In answering the question, the Cabinet Secretary made clear that the allegations Mr Scott referred to were investigated by Grampian Police and reviewed by the then Lord Advocate Dame Eilish Angelini and found to be false. So she just said she had no connection with the case whatsoever, and now we know exactly what she's been up to. And many other things as well that I could refer to, but it'll take a little bit of time. I don't want to take up too much time out of the meeting, but there you have proof that the head of the justice, effectively the head of the justice system, is a liar. And not only has she lied, as we know from official documents, we know that she has perjured herself in court, she's perjured herself in the civil case against me in the Court of Session, and she's perjured herself in documents presented in my criminal case in the Sheriff Court. This person, who was a colleague of Mr Salmond and all the rest of the people, was found to, is in fact a liar and a perjurer. Let us hope she can be brought to justice, but you all know that this is what you're up against. This is corruption at the very highest level in Scotland. It's not something a little further down the line, which sometimes can be argued against in perhaps south of the border sometimes. This goes right to the top in Scotland. And any of the people who want to support Fresh Start Foundation, I hope that as many good people as possible will come forward and do so over the next 2 years. You must know what you're up against. You're up against corruption at the very top. I'll just remind you of one other thing before I finish, and that is something that's always been on my mind. In 2009, or shall I say 2010, after I was first arrested unlawfully when I was standing for Parliament for Aberdeen South, I didn't know very much about Scottish politics at the time. I don't know much now, but there's a question that I asked my legal team. And I said, Mr Salmond is always going, who was First Minister at the time, is always going on about independence and seems to regard everybody in Scotland who opposes him as some kind of traitor, betraying the cause and all the rest of it, not a true Scot, and so on and so on. I said, how could it be that he's going to such lengths to protect a unionist, a fellow colleague in his government? That unionist, of course, was Eilish Angelini. And I'll never forget the response that was given to me by one of my legal advisors. He told me, Robert, he said, Alex Salmond will protect Eilish Angelini up to the hilt because she has all the dirt on him. Now, I don't know if that was absolutely true or not, although the person who told me was in a position to perhaps know a good deal more than I know. And subsequent events, such as in 2011, that when Alex Salmond and his ministers all were found to be in breach of sections 10.1 and 21.1 of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act in an attempt to protect Eilish Angelini as much as the abusers themselves, or the alleged abusers. So that's what we are up against here. It's a terrible thing, but we have to fight it for the sake of all the children in the country. And of course we have similar problems south of the border. It's just that it's more condensed in Scotland because of the smaller population, of course, I'm sure you all appreciate, and the separate legal position there. Just very finally appeal, of course we have a very fine main speaker today, John Wedger, who's over there, he'll be speaking to you later. John is a great example of what should be done, and police speaking out, along with Maggie Oliver and another fine officer, Pete Jackson from Greater Manchester Police, who've taken an enormous risk, far greater risk than I did by speaking out, and they have paid the price, but they've been absolutely right, and they've got wonderful support as a result of it, and that support will increase. And I think when you hear John speak, you will understand just what a fine man he is, and perhaps encourage all your friends to give him as much support as possible in the future. But what I would love to say is, if there are any police in Scotland who are watching this, then I think that some of you should try and speak out, just the same as some of the officers south of the border have. I'm sure you have some very interesting stories to tell, and I think it would be great if someone had the courage to come forward, and I hope that will take place before too long. So thank you very much for those few minutes, and thank you for all of you for all the wonderful support over the years that you've given to me, and especially to Holly, who's one of the bravest women I've ever met in all my life. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, I've just got a question there.
Just before you leave the stage, I would like to say we should have one less police officer in Scotland. We should not have Ian Livingston as our acting chief constable.
I don't know too much about that, I say, but obviously you have a certain amount of support in the audience, I would say, for that. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for listening to me, and I'll hand over so you can get on with the rest of the programme. Thank you.
Before you start.
Yes.
2 minutes. Just
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Robert. I'll tell you all about Ian Livingston later on. John.
Right, thanks. First of all, I'd like to hear what I'm hearing today. The voices are getting strong and we're doing well. Now, one of the things that I'm coming up here today to talk about is last year I spoke in Dunblane, and my son has got a severe learning disability and he was abused over a 4-year period in a Church of Scotland home. Now, I brought that documentation with me, and I told people to go forward and speak to this historic abuse investigation. Well, during the week there I phoned up to find out how my son's case was doing, and I was informed. Before I did the statement, I was told I'd be allowed to go up and speak for my son because my son can't speak. Now I'm getting told I won't be allowed. Now I'm getting told my son's documentation, 40-page, will be put on a web page after the investigation is finished. Now, I'm sorry that I've told anybody to do this, because it isn't going to work. And the woman who even interviewed me was so sorry on the phone to me that she had misled me. It's shocking. And I've told Janine, because Janine knows all about this, and we've got to think another way of doing this, because this historic abuse aren't going to help us.
Let's go to the streets.
I've been shoved right out. Now I'm my son's voice. I've got document proof that it happened to him. And this government are not even going to allow me to be allowed to speak. As far as I'm concerned, now I don't want to go. But I want it brought out one way or another. And it'll not be done through in front of any Lord Lady Smith, because it's just a farce. Thanks.
You'll be able to give it testimony if that's what you want to do.
It's testimony, that's what I'm looking for, but
And you will have the chance
Yeah.
to speak
You must have the right to speak for your child if your child cannot speak.
I'm totally, I wasn't shocked, I'm disgusted. What I was told. And you've got to look at it some other way of taking this government on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
That's it.
Right, one of the things that we've been doing is we've been assembling all of the information that's already in the public domain. The video that was played, prepared by Kat, played at the start there, showed all of these headlines. And each of these stories, they tend to be well researched, they tend to be really shocking, and only there for the moment because it's journalism. You know, a week later it's forgotten. And what we're doing is we're assembling all of this information so you can tie it all up. Right, and we've chosen a Wikipedia format to do this. We call it Wikipedia, and it's remarkable because it shows the bigger picture. You see, if you look into one aspect was schools in Edinburgh, and you see all of the cases that's been in schools in Edinburgh, and it also throws up other things, areas where we know there's been abuse, and there's nothing in the press. I mean, not a word. That's also interesting fact. So it's allowing people to get informed. It's a work in progress just now, but it will be live quite shortly. We'll show you some examples just now, and I'll hand over to Stuart to talk more about it.
As David said, we've been working on, or Kat especially, seems to be our IT specialist over there, is working on Wikipedia. Everybody has a inkling of wanting to know if there's abusers in the area, perhaps even working at the school, as David mentioned. We're able to break down information into separate genres of areas that people work in, whether that be the military, education, medical practices. It's quite intrinsic into society. Everywhere you look, we have paedophiles and child abusers. The corruption, as has been mentioned quite a lot today, is quite ingrained into everything. As Robert quite rightly said, it goes right to the top of Scotland, and we're getting to see that on all levels. Within that level is paedophilia, and even the abusers and teachers don't seem to be getting the justice that they deserve. In Stirling, quite recently, there's a large case of, if I'll just bring it back up quickly. Perhaps people remember Walter Masaku, who was convicted in court of sex attacks against a deaconess, raping a child, and was even able to walk from court without seeing any time in jail. And this is something that we get to see over again. It seems to be care in the community, community service, should I say, rather. It's a great punishment, and all we ever seem to see in the court is child pornography. This person was taken for child pornography. If I run through a couple of figures for you, Police Scotland, Operation Lattice. In 2016, Police Scotland conducted a 6-week operation and recovered over 30 million images. Now, that identified more than 500 children aged between 3 and 18 who were victims or potential victims of online predators. 30 million images, that's more than images than I could imagine, you know. Think how many people that takes to have 30 million images. And this is just Police Scotland, that's right, never mind the global phenomena that we're finding again. Out of those, 77 individuals were arrested and charged. Now, I'm not sure how many mathematicians are here, but 77 people, 30 million images, to me that doesn't really add up at all. Number of kids subject to child protection plan has been up on 20% in Scotland. Since 2011 and 2012, child abuse crimes reported to Scot cops up 43%. In April 2016, Scot cops revealed they had 26 major child abuse operations underway. Charities in Scotland state rising child abuse figures are still only scratching the surface. More than 60 institutions in Scotland are included in the Scottish Government's child sexual abuse inquiry, with at least 100 Scottish teachers convicted of child sexual abuse crimes in the last 10 to 15 years. 1 in 14 adults say they were sexually abused by children, yet how many perpetrators are actually convicted by the state? As we're moving forward through Wikipedia, as we're moving forward throughout the country on our roadshows of the 36 destinations, we'll be building our portfolio, and we will be going live with Wikipedia onto the site. And as Wikipedia works, we'll be able to update it by the public. We too will need our help. We're 7 directors. I don't like to say we're trying to change the world, but we're certainly trying to wake the world up, and starting here in Scotland, about how ingrained the corruption and the abuse actually is. And as we move forward, people will be able to register. We'll obviously take on board full judgment on the articles that we put on Wikipedia. Everything is in the public domain, as I've mentioned before, so it's not just hypothetically accusing people because none of us would like to be in court. courts are a different thing altogether. We'll come back to the common law process later, I believe. But anyone who has any information on anywhere, whether it be this area, somewhere in Scotland, then we're happy to take testimony, as we keep saying. We'll be looking to take testimony from anyone who's been harmed in the past. This testimony will be used to move forward into a High Court public inquiry, and everything will be kept under lock and key. Excuse me 2 seconds, I was losing my train of thought there. I was going to go on a tangent, which I won't, I'll leave that to later on. Yeah, on that note, we will take any questions.
Does Fresh Start just include like those what were born in Scotland? Because obviously there's a lot of turmoil going on in England at the minute that you'd probably be aware,
Absolutely.
you know. If there's anybody from England want to contact Fresh Start?
At the moment, we're happy to take testimony from anywhere. However, we are
Different jurisdiction.
absolutely not as much as jurisdiction. I think we mentioned last week briefly. When we look at the population, Scotland's got a population of 5 million. There's more people that live in Newcastle, Sunderland, than live all in Scotland, and to have that, for us to then stretch our resources thin enough down south of the border, then we're unable to do so at the moment. But we're certainly already getting inquiries about setting up Fresh Start south of the border.
Because to be honest, I know that there's a lot of very, very disgruntled survivors what's been on the same a long time in England, yeah?
Yeah.
And they're so disgusted with what's happening down there.
We can see we're talking about the Scottish inquiry failing left, right and centre and being corrupted from the top down. We can see that in Westminster and England as well. We'll stretch through to Wales, Northern Ireland, Britain as an island. We see this as a global phenomenon. We've spoken briefly earlier on about Canada. Canada has an in-grade problem over there, whether our Queen has already been tried in the common law court for abducted children from children's homes in Canada. So we can see the problem goes throughout the world, and it's just, we have to start somewhere. And so for now, we're limiting ourselves to Scotland over the next 2 years, and then hopefully by the end of the 2 years is finished, then we'll have a base model that, yeah, we can then roll out. One of the things we want to do, part of what I bring to Fresh Start Foundation, is a fundraising platform, and Brian Goresh last week put it quite well in his description. We're all volunteers here. We see how hierarchical charities get infiltrated and get corrupted, and people take large wages, etc., etc. We are all volunteers at Fresh Start Foundation, and part of what we have here to do is facilitate you guys to make sure that you get the justice for any harm that you've come to, or people that you know that's harm. And the best way that charity works, from my experience in fundraising, is everybody needs a passion to do something. If you don't believe in what you do, you'll never be able to do anything about it. And so we're all on the same level as you guys. And if somebody wants to have a sponsored walk or a sponsored kayak or anything you want, then feel free and get in touch with us, and we can then facilitate that onwards. And we're all about helping everybody.
I'll be doing the North London in September near the Fresh Start.
Well, that would be very welcome.
Could I say just a couple of words about this? Because we have been contacted by quite a surprising number of people from England, there is a difficulty to do with logistics. We are going around every Scottish local authority, that's 32. We're going to big cities twice, that's 36. The number of local authorities in England is something like 360. Right? It's huge, you know. So you're dealing with something that is logistically and in terms of an organisation very difficult to cope with. Now, the way we see this going is if there's people in areas, say Wales or the southwest or the northeast of England, who want to replicate what we're doing, then we would give them everything we've learned as to how we do this and what the objectives are. And we're hopeful that that will happen. There is certainly interest. We're getting some interest from Wales, and there's certainly been interest from survivors in England.
Yeah.
So there may be movements there. It wouldn't be that we would do it. that we would just help people copy what we're doing.
Interesting that you're getting interest from Wales actually, after the Waterhouse, you know. That's excellent, yeah.
And Wales is smaller, Wales is more manageable in terms of the number of people and the number of, simply the areas you've got to cover. England is difficult because you really need to divide it into 5 or 10 because it's so complex, and then you've got the difficulty of the abuse didn't stay in one place. People were trafficked across jurisdictions the whole time. So you need people who are able to communicate across boundaries as well. So there are a lot of challenges in there. But if there are people in England and Wales and Ireland who want to do this as well, then we would be delighted to talk to them.
Can I make a point about, on the same vein, what if somebody from England wants to give testimony, but they're quite prepared to travel to Scotland? Does that make it too complicated because the abuse never happened in Scotland?
Tell us.
Ian, it's a very good question. On the whole, I would agree with Brian, who's just spoke to tell us we're happy to take testimony, because the more testimony from those who have been harmed that we can get, the better, and it's all about having evidence. Now, we hear talk about the courts, we hear talk about public inquiry, etc., etc. The reason we are going down that route is because we all realise that corruption is so in-depth and in spread. Now, that's through the judicial system itself. So how can we ever look at being successful in a normal court when we have to go through the common law court, which is one of the reasons John Smith is here. Janine?
Yeah, just a brief point I was wanting to make on that is that we find that paedophiles they're not just in Scotland. Generally, the way that the paedophile rings operate is they're not only UK-wide, they're international. So we'll be finding that paedophiles that we come up against will be appearing in England as well, or they're appearing across all different parts of the world.
Australia, Canada,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And it's very hard to, we talk about jurisdiction, I will come to you, Bill, and the gentleman at the back of the room also has his hand up. Talk about jurisdiction, we've heard that word mentioned a few times. Again, Brian's absolutely right, we're British, we have common law country. People get confused with the legal system and the lawful system, and there's a complete separation of the two at the moment. For something to be legal, it has to be lawful, and if it's not lawful, then it's not legal. It's quite simple. The media, the political elite like to confuse people and think that's not the case. And the only way that we can get jurisdiction across the country, I suppose, is to go back to the roots of the common law system, and in that sense, it doesn't matter whether it's Scottish law, English law, it's all common law. Do not hurt, harm, cause loss or injury, and as long as that happens, we will get a jury of peers and we will move forward. Gentleman at the back, you had your hand up. Do you still want to ask a question? Has it been answered already? Or?
I'm not entirely sure at the moment, but if what I'm about to say is relevant, it might be at some point. But as we speak, there's a class action in Canada against the Jehovah's Witnesses for $66 million. And in Canada today, in Canadian television, there's going to be a documentary about the Jehovah's Witnesses being broadcast. Now that, somebody was likely to put that onto YouTube. Now, in Dublin last year, 2 elders in a congregation reported child abuse to the police, and they were disfellowshipped because of it. Disfellowshipped is another word for excommunication. Now, 3 elders came from the London branch, travelled over to Dublin, had hotel accommodation, and travelled back, and all that financial burden was put on the congregation in Dublin, and to pay for it. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because there are multiple actions against the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Australian Royal Commission a couple of years ago. There was a case in England a couple of years ago again, one in Glasgow of last year. If the branch office in London closes as a result of financial reasons, there'll be lots of Jehovah's Witnesses that might need fresh start, because all they've known is to be born and raised a Jehovah's Witness, but that's the only life they've had. But they're going to need somewhere to go to speak to people in Fresh Start, will be in Scotland and so on. I also know of a Jehovah's Witness where I live who was abused I'm not entirely sure if the person was an elder ministerial servant, but the fact is, where I live, where she lives, there are no services at all for either of us, none. And that girl is screaming for help. So I think if I see her again, I will tell her about Fresh Start. I've told her about Welcome Scotland. I think what we're looking at here is a movement. I hope that doesn't sound rebellious, but we're looking at something that's new, and I think we could change that flag you have in the back there to be British.
I can certainly see that happening in the future without a shadow of a doubt. Everything starts somewhere. You know, I used to date an ex Jehovah's Witness who had suffered abuse herself at the hands of her father, and I think no matter which part of the Christian religion you are, or one of the monotheistic religions, the main three that we see abuse being quite rampant in there, and the more orthodox it happens to be. And again, we're talking about the elite majority here, whether it be the Catholic priests or the, as John's found, the Church of Scotland, or as you experience within the Jehovah's Witness temples. And I suppose it's very much kept within its own groups. And the same with the Muslim community. People will go to the Muslim leaders or your church leaders because that's first point of call, because a lot of the time, as you said, that's all that people know. So we're open and welcome. Paedophilia doesn't care what religion you are, doesn't care what part of the community you are. If you've got, if you can be shown as vulnerable in a way, the state will take your children no matter who you are. And paedophiles will take your children no matter who you are. So it doesn't matter colour or creed. And so whoever we can help, we'll certainly try to help our best abilities. Andrew?
Two things. First thing is geography. What I'm very aware of is in the borders is if you live somewhere in Northumbria, especially of course if you're being abused in Scotland, you will be abused in England. So I think we might need a margin on the voices we hear from England, but a margin into Northumbria, but the abuse must be happening in Scotland at the same time. So I don't think we can't go black and white. If you're in Northumbria or Carlisle, we're not listening, because there will be people being transported every evening from Jedburgh down to Whitley back up to Jedburgh, and vice versa.
Absolutely. For who's to say that they're not on EasyJet from Edinburgh to London and into Westminster? You know,
I'm just saying in that particular situation,
absolutely.
there's something live there. The other thing I want to pick out, I keep hearing it concerns me. I'm quite happy it blasts me down. I keep hearing LGBT, Muslim, JW are all full of paedophiles. Well, no, that's wrong. What's really important is people who rape. The fact that LGBT or Muslim or Christian or non-dom have no religion isn't the problem. The problem is these people are harming people that are rapists. We've got paedophilia with child rape. I think we need to be careful not to label groups, but label the individual within groups for their actions.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. As you say, it doesn't matter, paedophilia doesn't care who you are. You know, child rape, as you say, is child rape, and it doesn't matter, you know, whether you're a little blonde, blue-eyed, or whether you're, you know, Chinese, Asian, it doesn't matter. If you've a vulnerable child, then you will be taken advantage of.
I don't know how people feel about this, but when my parents were married in the early 60s, it was frowned upon for a Catholic to marry a Protestant. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And I was abused by both of them, and they were both charged. But then I was taken into residential care, and I was abused in the Church of Scotland. So to me, it's not a religious thing at all. It's people using religion as a front.
Yeah. Yes, Bill.
Regarding division between north and south of the border, we've got Scottish law and we've got English law. The two seem to be very different animals. Now, as far as common law is concerned, does that affect common law?
No. John will no doubt correct me, he's a little bit more of an advocate than I'd say I am myself, but no. Common law, any Western Commonwealth country who, you know, our law in Scotland, our common law is based on Declaration of Arbroath. Yes, the Magna Carta 1215 in England. However, when it comes to law, both are based in the same four statutes, as it were. Let's try not to use that word, shall we say? We don't like statutes. But yeah, 4 basic rules. Do not hurt, harm, cause loss or injury to any other man or woman. We are men and women. We're not people or persons. We're men and women. And the majority of humanity feel empathy. It's only the psychopaths who seem to have gotten themselves into the powers of power, places of power, that actually want us to all harm. I very rarely meet somebody who wants to kill me straight away or wants to cause me harm. Most of the time, someone, hi, how are you doing? My name's Joe, my name's Bill, my name's Mary. Everyone actually wants to be nice and get on with the people on the whole. And so, as long as we can stick to those 4 attributes, then we'll be fine. And common law throughout the world, you know, so we have statute law. Well, I'll just say a little bit, and I'll come with Brian in a second. A little bit. Statute law is canon law, corporate law, anything where somebody, Pharisee law from Egypt, absolutely, where common law puts us as individuals. The difference between Scotland and England, Scotland, we are all sovereign, we are all kings and queens in rights of our own, so we are a sovereign individual person. In England it's slightly different, where there's the land and the country's sovereign. So, but again, because of the Union of the Crowns, we are all amalgamated under the same laws and rules, and it doesn't matter whether you live in Canada or Australia, you can still draw on the Magna Carta 1215. I stand under Article 61, as everybody in the room should do. Otherwise you're an outlaw, just so you're aware. And as for rebellion being a dirty word, be rebellious. We're all here to be rebellious, and rebellion is what needs to happen. Unfortunately, we can't get to the streets, Brian, because as soon as we get out in the streets and start, we can protest, but we have to protest peacefully. We have to take to the establishment. They want us to get angry. They want us to be shouting and screaming and going down and starting riots and showing violence, because then they can come at us with the full arm of the legal system. You know, we have to do things properly, and by doing things through a public inquiry, by getting and building evidence to then take it and get indictments, then the legal system and the courts have to, because the courts are still based on common law. They try to kid us and they take jurisdiction away and they put us all lost at sea, when actually we are built on the common law, and if the evidence is there and the indictments are there, we will get a jury of peers and we will take these people to task.
Stuart, let's just make the point about common law. Right? Think the world. Where was the British Empire? Right? Britain, America, Canada, South Africa, Rhodesia, Australia, New Zealand, and various other countries. Right? In Britain, it crosses borders. It's the grand leveller. Statute laws will put us in jail. Any other system, civil, Napoleonic, will put us in jail. Common law, stand on it. Your rights are not worth the paper they're written on. You must lift them off the page, take them by the hand, and exercise them. Walk them all the way there and all the way back. And if you're going to do it again, do again.
Well said. Phyllis, was it?
Yeah. I wanted to ask if Fresh Start are willing to help whistleblowers, you know, to sort of get them into the newspapers, get them medical assistance or anything like that they need. Would Fresh Start?
Fresh Start will look at every case individually. We will take away. We're going to hear from a very big whistleblower this afternoon after coffee, and John, by all accounts, has been through the mile, as is Robert. I have to say, Robert, you're a very heroic man to stand up and do what you've done as well, and you never actually take on the amount of work that you've actually done, and you're a very humble man when actually you work as hard as the next person. But yeah, whistleblowers need protecting no matter which avenue they come from, and if we can find you and we can help you in any way, then yeah, we will, Phyllis, absolutely.
Can I say a few?
Absolutely.
A word or two about whistleblowers. I mean, this is vital to what we're doing. We're already in contact with some people from Police Scotland, former officers of Police Scotland, who have a story to tell and are wanting to speak to us. There will be whistleblowers from every walk of life, and we very much do want these people to come forward. Now, when they come forward, just one thing, one part of your question concerned me a little bit, because you talked about getting the medical attention. Well, that means the NHS, that means the state.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's a problem.
So that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Because what you've then got is the state knows what's in your hand. Okay, this is a problem. If you're talking about retribution for whistleblowers, right? There's often retribution, there's often intimidation. Okay. So what can we as Fresh Start do? Well, one thing we can do is, if the whistleblower wishes to keep things confidential, we can keep it confidential. If the whistleblower, and this is often the wiser course, particularly if they're already coming under attack, if the whistleblower wishes to make the case public, we will assist in getting that case out. And we have contacts with the mainstream media, we have contacts with the alternative media, and we have our own organisation, small though it is. So we can get messages out to some extent. Okay? But I wouldn't want to be too blasé about the problems of whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are targeted. Whistleblowers, and John, I'm delighted John's here today to talk about this. Whistleblowers have an extremely difficult path, and that requires to be done with judgment and with discretion as well as courage. And the whistleblower, him or herself, must be the person who makes the ultimate call, because it's his or her life we're talking about. And what our role is to support and help and advise and do everything we can, and we will do that. But we have to understand the real nature of whistleblower. It's not a problem-free exercise.
Because I probably won't be able to be at all of the meetings, so I would like to stick with Northampton, but I've learned most up north. And it's been great to do.
Kenny, can you come forward a wee bit?
Sorry. Anyway, just saying that I bring along, and I've been to conferences for about 20 years, DVDs, CDs, copies of lots of different things that some of you probably would be interested in. The bigger picture, I used to teach art in a big comprehensive school for 27 years. I love the big picture. It's been mentioned today, isn't it, already? So any donations, although just help yourself really, are not reasonable the one. This goes to Fresh Start. And also, just when we've got flyers, I've brought a selection. I've got so many, I've probably about 3 tables. So do help yourself. Any flyers, you're very welcome. I just mentioned 2, the Grey Pope. I know Kevin Anning well. I organised his tour in Manchester before he was kicked out of the country when William Coombs, who was a native Canadian abused orphan in the Kamloops orphanage, and William Coombs told Kevin about the way that the Queen and Prince Philip chose 10 orphans they'll never see again. Now William Coombs is no more. He went into hospital and didn't come out. Now, Kevin, I'm close touch with him. I've just bought his book. I've got quite a few of them about common law training manual and a special offer £5. Again, any money goes in there. It's very, very good. Again, I'm the introducer. I'm not really, I can't get my head around a lot of this stuff, but I know quite a bit, from what I've picked up. The other thing I'll just say is about the Grey Pope, because it's something I did tell Kevin about, because he's been exposing the truth about the Jesuit general. And the Jesuits ran, I'm not religious, I'm not judgmental. I gave that a long time ago, and that is a huge key, is to just keep, if you like a constant. And if you work from the heart, this is what we don't want you to do, because this is where the power is. This is where the power is, and we know this. And it's really, and the thing is to love yourself unconditionally first, and then you can give out. Very difficult for any of the survivors of it, honestly. Now, Anyway, Kevin didn't really pick up on this, but the Jesuit general, which was Adolfo Patrino a while back, is the military arm of the Vatican, and nobody seems to know that. And by the way, the Vatican oversees all the Christian denominations, it doesn't matter what. And I've got Spotlight, a great film, I wish I could copy it, I can't, I see what encrypted. I can't copy it, but Spotlight do have those great trailers on that line. That was the fact-based drama set in the Boston Globe, and how the paedophile police were protected. It's a system, obviously.
Yeah,
so anyway, Jesuit general hides in the Vatican. He's in the God business, or guns or drugs, and obviously trafficking. And then you've got another one, the Grey Pope. Now, the exposure of that gentleman, who I'd quite like to meet him, wouldn't you? I want to ask him some questions. Hidden in the Vatican, and Pepe Orsini, the Orsini family bloodline. There are many, many, many bloodlines and many, many different ways. I've got an article that I will try and dig out and try and network out called the Zoroastrian bloodlines that we never hear about. And there are many, they are huge. And the Orsini family is just one. And the
black nobility.
Yeah, the black nobility, the Borgias and the Medicis, that's their history, and they were pretty dark. And his family is hugely wealthy, and his houses were little. Now, Karen Hudas, I love her whistleblowers. She was working for the World Bank for 20 years, and she came out. So she has put lots online, American obviously, and she tells a lot of history. Also about another group of beings who were told became extinct, and that's Homo propensis, the coneheads. Look at Karen Hudas. We're being kept like mushrooms, kept in the dark and fed to. But it's time to blossom.
And on that note, we're going to finish for this session at the moment. If you do want to have a look at anything Penny's got over there, feel free. We're not going anywhere. We'll all be hanging around. Robert's going to be here. We'll be here for the next. If we take half an hour, and then back in for one to start 1:15, and we'll hear from John this afternoon. Thank you.
There's some food at the back as well, so please help yourselves.